Hello, good morning. Does it work, the sound? Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Okay, so we'll have first performance lecture. It's going to take 37 minutes, and then we will have the second half of the session for talking. So yes, without much further ado, so this is reproductive labor, you will see. I will, in a way, oh, what happened? Hey.
I think everything's okay. Please continue.
Okay, sorry,
We had
that
a
was just
little
break.
break in the internet.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, so I'll start. So you will see there is it's a bit of a voyage through extraction zones and beyond. So there is sound, image, and text. So let us begin.
And really quick, Mirko, tell us who you are and where you're doing your work.
Okay, yes, of course. So yeah, I come originally from Southeast Europe, ex-Yugoslavia, trained as an artist, visual artist, and performance. And I'm also doing research in environmental humanities, and also doing cultural organizing, and yeah, working on this issue in social level now as well. So the moment I'm a postdoc researcher at Linköping University, Institute for Culture and Society. Yes. Okay, so I'll share the screen now and start. Just a second. Okay. Okay, just once more say, see my shared screen now? Someone?
Yes, we can see it. It's
okay,
not
great.
Full screen yet.
Okay, so we begin.
And just hit the full screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's full screen now?
No.
No. Now?
No.
No. Okay, sorry.
Yes, now it is.
Okay, great.
I think. Yes, perfect.
Arcanes of Terran Reproduction. 1. Empires of Extraction. Once upon a time, a people from the shores of the Danube River climbed the shiny hill, toiled their way inside its flanks to take out the crystal structures. Earth started to leak, at first quietly, then as a storm. And it continues. 7,000 years later, just a few hills south, the dust rises and settles after the explosions. The red hills, I cannot forget your bonds. Now in billions of pieces, blown in the wind, through my lungs, and it continues. Some say no, some say stop. To extract or to get extracted. This is the binary, the power imperative, hanging over many earth beings. The choice is mostly not yours, theirs, ours to make. I talk to you from the semi-peripheries of Europe, diasporic in empire, from non-citizen citizenship, non-white whiteness. You who are caught up in the power dynamics between the core and the periphery, pushed and pulled by the interconnected powers of technoscience and empire, finance and law. And in solidarity with those of you who stand at the very frontiers of extraction. I listen and learn from you, but cannot say anything you don't already know. This is for those of us who have had the fortune not to be targeted head-on with the full violence of the extractivist apparatus, at least so far. Definitions. Extractivism is not a branch of industry. It is an apparatus, an axiomatics, an all-over classification and management of bodies, a shapeshifter in constant transformation, albeit with recurring protocols that disclose its footprints. Frontier making, enclosure, non-consensual penetration and cutting, dismemberment, and their marketization. And last and first, tailings, holes in the ground, besieged vines, exhausted bodies. Extraction is normal. It happens around the clock, 24/7, 365, during peacetime, during wartime, during pandemics. There is no time to spare. Each second with machines silent is lost. To whom was it ever given, promised in the first place? As everything normal, behind it lies a long and turbulent history of discipline and punishment. No one is born extractivist. There are many beginnings and ends. The discovery of smelting, bronze, transition to iron, the establishment of agriculture, and so forth. But only with the European colonial modernity, its expulsions, enclosures, witch hunts, colonies, plantations, slavery, can we speak of extractivism as a mode of subjectivation and as a world unmaking project. Silvia Federici recounts how the bourgeois mind reduced nature to a great machine, and proletarian bodies were reduced to cogs and wheels, mechanic, which means less than reasoning bodies, nature, which means less than living matter, both branded as resources. Expulsions from land and proletarianization of European peasantry, witch hunts on the one side of the Atlantic, and colonization of black and indigenous bodies, communities and lands across the oceans are indivisible. All are imbued with sexism and classism, forced labor. The crucial distinction, however, lies in another core technique of European modernity: racism and its maximization of violence. The perceived problem of workforce for Imperial Portugal in the 1400s was infamously solved by equating black bodies to matter, which then could be propertied and merchandised to populate the mines and plantations of the Americas. This propertying is closely related to the coeval enclosure and classification of geological bodies. Achille Mbembe says, the noun black transforms people of African origin into living ore from which metal is extracted. Capitalism is born from a racist and sexist sorting of bodies. Then came the factory, the steam engine, oil. Extractivists well know that their time is limited, always running out. They work hard to displace the frontier, deeper, farther, to outsource onto more vulnerable backs, lesser legal subjects, in an end game of cutting and running, before the mud and smoke rise to the neck. Escape routes, expeditions are planned, a continuous extension of the frontier. Today, with the so-called Arctic rush, the so-called green mining, tomorrow space mining. From one well to the other, from one technology to another, one community after the other. In frontiers, as Nick Estes reminds us, war against others, peoples and natures, is legal. Extractivism has many faces, some more hidden than others. Beyond the mine, the dam, the shiny screens and their fallouts, let us follow other spills, planned and collateral. In extraction empires, academia is partially involved in digging, art is too. Experts and specialists are expected to take from those who offer their skill or wisdom and run away with a so-called discovery or data inscribed in hard drives, cameras, recorders, largely without due reciprocity and mutuality, to then insert the findings into the circuits of globalizing art and education, thus circumscribing properties of the carriers of knowledge into enclosure, into ownership. Intellectual property is perhaps the most pervasive modality of fencing in of the living and the non-living. It sharply splits the overdeveloped from the underdeveloped, center from the periphery, north from the south. Knowledges are collective bodies, fragile as the fleshly ones. They are not made for the violence of propertying and enclosure, epistemicide, bullet holes through collective memory. In extraction empires, at a time when the so-called natural resources seemed to be running short, new lands were discovered. Self-proclaimed tech wizards merged the extraction of earth beings with prospecting and appropriating of cognitive and affective territories. This invention, to use the term highly valued in those lands, bypassed the gloomy voices which told of the limits to growth or planetary boundaries. Instead, the subjects afforded a connection to the incorporated internet, shared more and more for free. In a double pincer move, extractivists staked claims on data and bodies. By flattening the cognitive and the bodily information into information, and by propertying the micro-labors of clicking, of sharing, of searching, of thinking, while supposedly freeing them. This informational wealth, embossed in mineral and human bodies, would grow almost effortlessly, almost naturally. So too would the subtle and not so subtle banality of everyday extraction. In extraction empires, oil and coal have been the magic of liberation from labor power, sort of, oiling the path toward the ultimate fantasy, independence of profit from muscle and brain, surplus with zero accountability. As the proletarian forces resisted, the fossil capital was forced to trickle some of its riches, cars and cheap trinkets and enchantments, to hook up the many into fossil-fueled foyers and cars. In the rising heat of early 21st century, the wager of informational extractive capital is with the powers of infinite sun, tireless waters, mighty winds, blowing for free, if you can capture, store and move them, control their migratory patterns. Tiny detail is, billions and billions more Earths need to be dug out, again from underneath the First Nations of Americas, Fennoscandia, Sapmi, Africa, Southeast Asia. And again, from Europe. Can you rebuild the burning house with the master's tools? The same logistics. The horizon of this master narrative is that there will be just enough clicks to train artificial intelligence, just enough fossils to dig just enough minerals and metals to repaint the facades green, smart, renewable, while stains wash away into the sea, forgotten, just another stage in the history of so-called development. Another challenge has been overcome. In extraction empires, Frontiers were drawn through hearts and households. Love and affect were manipulated through coercion and deception, instrumentalized to sexual difference, policed through racial lines, enclosed within four walls, propertied by the heteronormative family. The secluded were subjected to carry water from the streams, to mend the clothes, change the diapers, feed and nurture, care and educate. While some were freed, but only conditionally, freed to negotiate the dealings of the free market, the binaries of gain and loss. The market eternalized, totalized into all our relations. Enclosure and appropriation of affect has always been quintessential ore for extraction. The network society, the cultural capital, the green tech, the care economy have been, are shaped by this imperial imperative: extract or get extracted. Human labors are pitched against earth beings and against each other. Jobs are cut out by splitting violence. Wages or clean water, fish or gold, develop or breed. Impossible and false choices. Policed, parachuted from above. All made prisoners under open sky. Before and beyond the empires, the hegemonies, the forts, the dualisms, labor, the subjects of the transatlantic passage, of the plantations, in the assembly plants, piles of IT waste, containers and boxes, export and extraction zones, old and new, west and east, north and south. You, sweaty minds, laboring hearts, sage bodies, you know full well how exploiting and dominating dehumanizes the masters, the colonizers, the owners, and you know the resilience of your frictions, resistances, world-making. You carry the history, you hold the future. And you know the power of no, and the powers of yes and, yes you, yes me. The great minority of beings have never been extractivist, neither would they. In the oceans, in the strata, in the backwoods, around the fireplaces, through the night, amongst the blades of grass, in broadest daylight. Listen. Earth others are at work, patiently, vigorously. You, sie, they, I, we will have been supported, sustained, hosted by many. It does not just happen. Smell, taste, touch, fruits of labor's in bodily mode. Enter the hewers of wood and the drawers of water, the lumpen proletarians, the wretched, the witches, the bodies of difference, traversed by toxicity, vulnerability, exposed, yet resisting the foundational fantasy of the independent modern subject, uninterested in survival at another's cost. Through debility and disability, you offer hospitality and solidarity, radiate curiosity, yearning. How do we manage to cope and thrive? This is a mystery, but only when observed from above, from the capital, from the drone. Arcanes of Earth reproduction are out here in plain air, an open secret, They, you, she, we, ze whisper, a spell. It goes something like this. With mille laden manukiles. I do a hell of a lot of washing, cleaning, cooking, renewing, supporting, preserving, etc. Knees, elbows, paws, leaves soaked in housework, care work, in homes that are not fortresses, touch the rock, touch the sweat. Generations and generations of sisters, brothers, outsiders within. Labors that are the constitutive outside, yet the underside, the surround, the primary condition of capitalist production, the often unpaid or underpaid, always invisibilized works. Affect, care, subjectivation, community making. Other than hypermasculine workers, automatic, expected, natural, enclosed inside the home, used and abused, devalued, and masculinized wage producer, enclosed in the mines, suffocated in the factory lines, automatic, expected, cheap, used and abused, devalued. Workers hyper-separated from each other. Polarizations and alienations. Extractive frontiers cut through each household, sometimes through the same person. The fantasy of mastery goes well beyond four walls. Homemaking and keeping go even further. Home places, sites of resistance and liberation struggle. Are you at home now? Is it burning? Shall we run to the hidden abodes in the common alleys of counterproduction, irreproduction? Let us regenerate and reweave, reclaim and remaster. Across the over and underdeveloped parts of the world, apart from superficial maneuvers of reconciliation, contradictions between social reproduction and capital have been ever deepening. Yawning out into the intensifying rushes for the last drop, last foot of land, shocking devaluations of food, care, health. New digital and biotech fascism. Reproductive works are clear but evasive targets of this civil war, and they are the last frontier of extraction empires. But, inching closer to the core, the real frontier is disciplined ignorance, because capitalist modernity has been a long and forceful training to unlearn and unsee reproductive labors. Yet, there are limits to war. Weapons, all-seeing as they want to be, they see only one way. They don't see any other way, all the other ways. Extracto-patriarchal vision does not know where to look for you and me. To notice reproduction, you can only while you participate in it. Labors of care and maintenance have always already been ongoing, the condition of living and becoming, the vegetal, the animal, the earth others. Social reproduction of earth, or in Zapatista territories, the praxis of sociality called pluriverse. Coexistence, cooperation, and solidarity stretch beyond the imperial borders, the social, which transgresses the arbitrary borders between the species, bios and geos, life and non-life. In latitudes where I find myself, nowadays this or something like this also gets called multi-species or more than human social. But let us pause here before yet another novel turn and listen and listen. Kim Tolbear tells, indigenous peoples have never forgotten that non-humans are agential beings engaged in social relations that profoundly shape human lives. Your knowledges have historically been violated and extracted and continue to be so, and I refuse this poisonous legacy. Unworking, vast ignorance, mending and repairing, This is my homework. It's called Internationalist Pluriversal Solidarity. And once again, who is we? We are nameless, invisible from the enclosure, because, with Stefano Harney and Fred Moten from Black Diaspora, we know that common is the surround, beyond and beneath, before and before enclosure. And you, Z, we, I, have been invited into this open, a place of gathering, under reproductive labors, facing each other's in community and commons, through tensions and entanglements, in self-determination and self-management. Community, commoning, pluriverse. Spectres are haunting each and every pore of techno-societies, the spectres of Earth others, those turned into debris, piles, waste. The tailings do not go anywhere, do not leave. Shimmering, organizing, rising, they are here to stay. Through the disaster, through the storm, as a ghost, as a scream, as an alliance. Struggles to protect and remake thriving land, healthy waters and air, block pipeline routes, proposed airports, planned mines, waste dumps, nuclear reactors, clear cuts. And they are waged along the frontiers of extractivist expansionism throughout the social, in classrooms, households, bedrooms, street corners. These latter, often less violent zones of friction, are where boundary struggles are waged. The boundary struggles to redraw the lines between production and reproduction, economy and society, between society and terrestrial others. Territories of anti-extractivist challenge, post-extractivist transitions, zones of assembling Terran loves, Terran knowledges, Terran unions, Terran commons. 3. Tailings and transitionings. If a general praxis of earth beings are indeed underpaid, unpaid labors of maintenance, community and commoning, social reproduction of earth, let us ask, whose science, whose knowledge, whose families, whose arts, whose work? So we must always anew question and unsettle, where do you, I, we sit in relation to the extractivist colonial imperialist apparatus? At its periphery, core, border, how do we, you, I benefit, are privileged and or exploited? Where do our tailings begin, where and when they shall end? Plotting exits from the predestined development, unlearning systematically cultivated and willful ignorance. Tailing the leaks, past, future, upcoming, and the background it spills into policies, laws, deregulations, allegalities, illegalities of extractivism, becoming submerged together and rising in a collective effort embankment. Shoulder to rock, rock to root, root to foot. Dismantling all extractive protocols, offering special persuasions every day, everywhere. Some propositions, invitations for post-extractivist homework, housework, care work. Terrans are of 1,000 sexes, yet nation states and capital recognize only gendered citizens and to different degrees. Through labor of queer feminist trans colleagues, boundary struggles for sexual and reproductive freedoms and gender anti-normativity are inseparable for climate and earth justice. Terran bodies are in incessant experimentation with mutual boundaries, destabilizing ideas of fixed or self-contained identity, nature's queer performativity. How to unsettle juridically, politically, personally, the boundaries between family and environmental law, proliferating, transing, and queering the crucial proposals of wild law, questioning, challenging, advocating the distances, dynamics, comfort zones of androcentric social. How do informed consent, responsivity, proximity look like between pluriversal bodies? Nothing is pre-given. Terran socialities and intimacies are mysteries, utterly fine threads. From these fine whisperings, questions ring loud. Can relatives, lovers, partners be extracted with bulldozers? 2. Terrans know, but do not know property regimes. Land ownership, intellectual property, and so forth. Following feminist science studies, knowledge is a bond, a common, an ability to respond, a responsibility, accountability. Knowledge is dynamic entanglement. With Karim Barad, a part of the universe makes itself intelligible to another part. And the knowledge produced is not only ours. Terran knowledges are not his or yours or mine. They are no one's. They are enacted, commoning of powers, transgressing intellectual property and legal subjected regimes. From these caring conversations, questions rise loud. Can knowledge holders be disposed of, cancelled, erased, expelled without due consultation, diplomacy, agreement? Three, value of Earth is beyond measure. Terrans relate in reciprocities, mutualities. Following the lead of wages for housework, Terrans demand wages for care work, effort, cleaning, holding, supporting. In this world of many worlds, before and beyond capital, wage is one of the names among a billion relations, a billion tiny houses built of self-determination and self-management, threaded with equity, responsibility, trust, and solidarity, all which is evacuated, captivated by capitalist wage transactions. Terran labors reproduce justice and joy, values no drones or shovels can reach, counterproductions, e-reproductions. Movements of labor make and unmake the earth. Labor movements can help liberate it. Exposure, fragility, porosity are non-standard modes of class organizing and belonging. Aerial, organic, inorganic, watery, precarious bodies, proletarians at the bottom of it all. I don't know your names, but I know your workings. Transitionally, I call you Aerobiogeoquatariat, a class belonging to the plurispecies social, composed within the local bodies and forces, retracing the pathways of life and non-life, alliances always both grounded and translocal, conjunctions of difference, always transgressing the extractivist imperative and imperial frontiers. You refuse to blast colleagues. We are busy with some real work, rebuilding a classless social, this time and again. Terran sexualities, knowledges, transitions, unions, labors of social reproduction of Earth, well up against dams, enclosures, banks, accumulations. Carry the bucket, the gift, the message. Carried carriers of breathing, waves of border crossings, who unforget, summon, listen to, converse with the specters of those who have been extracted, of those who are yet to come. Tailings, transitionings into before, beyond, after the enclosure. My bones are clay, heart is liquid metal. I flow like water, uncontainable. Call me sister or brother, relative or ancestor, but don't call me nickel, zinc, silver or gold. We are not here to serve. We are not a tool, a resource, a slave. Earth others yearn to be free, worthy of Earth's freedom. Well,
Wow. Okay, so I know it's hard on Zoom because we're not here to share with you, but or I mean, usually in front of an audience, you know, we would clap or something. And I know that's a little untraditional for Zoom, but I mean, if you want to express through the chat a clap, or here I'm clapping, that was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we now have some time to talk with you about this. So let's do it. We're getting a lot of comments coming in from the chat. Thank you. It was wonderful. Many thanks for an excellent, inspiring performance. Thank you for an amazing performance. So hopefully that's a little bit of the audience experience that you would get in person. So tell us a little bit about how this piece came to be.
Need to regather the breath, but I'm here. Yeah. Well, it's really been, yeah, a few years in the. It's been growing really slowly and absorbing, and you know, it's really just so many conversations, and it's hard to convey it also in this format because yeah. It's also text, and it's full of you know, it's really talking to a lot, talking to and for to a lot of persons, and that comes across a bit more in the text when also you can see, you know, the quotes, etc., which I think is important. But yeah, in this format it was a bit hard to do all that live. But so it comes from last 3 or actually 5 years maybe of yes. Working on this mainly in well, back in Southeast in post-Yugoslavian space, but also in Finland. A lot of time in Kainu, where the previous initiative took mainly place, but also across Fennoscandia. Now I live in Sweden, so on this side as well, and also across the Atlantic. Yes, it's many relations. It's really hard to bring it into a choir, but yeah, it's really constantly trying to somehow find this format, how to create a choir out of it. Yeah.
Do we have any questions or comments from our audience? Please, we're a small enough group, so please feel welcome if you'd like to say something to come forward and say, welcome to switch on your camera or your audio. And if you don't want to ask that way, welcome to also put it in the chat and I can relay it. So please, everybody feel welcome.
No, hello, I'm Hanna Kuttorm from the University of Helsinki. Thank you very much for this wonderful and inspiring presentation. And I would especially like to thank you for the invitation to come to this space and take this time and space to slow down and just to concentrate on this this wonderful, or I mean this both terrible but also hopeful use and views on this time what we are now living and going through. And I would then also especially, I don't have any question, I just love this what you have done, and but I just wanted to thank for the wonderful word or concept to take in use, or where does it come from, this earth others. It is wonderful because I have also always been searching for a word which would because if we use non-human others or more than human others or whatever, there is still this some kind of distinction between human and non. But earth others includes every both human and non-human others. So thank you for that. fast.
Yeah, that's Val Plumwood. Yeah, Feminism and Mastery of Nature.
Okay.
It's really wonderful book, very important
Yeah.
to me. Yeah. It's a, I think, yeah, powerful word. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's very hard to find a word. That is not non.
No, exactly.
Yes, which always somehow brings the less or inferior, while again still keeping this other, which is of course comes from the tradition of there is a standard, but still in a way other just being also this difference. I think it's I find it quite nice. Yeah, thanks.
Also different kinds of differences, yes.
Yeah.
Included.
Yeah.
So just thank you.
Thanks so much for the comment. Yeah, glad you enjoyed. Yeah. Is there a question? Then we have a question in the chat, right?
Yes, we sure do. In the chat, it has come in. How do you feel combining art and so-called scientific work, which is mainly textual rather than performance? How do they nurture each other based on your experience?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's been now some years, I guess, because I mean, I come from the arts and I was trained as a painter and I painted a lot and drew, but at the same time I was doing performance throughout, and I was lucky to somehow mature in a context which was also very much in South Europe, where we always had, like, let's say that in the arts there was a very strong space for like discussion and reading and talking through text and with text, and then just some, I think, quite I guess the themes is not the right word, but the problems or the issues slowly kind of demanded more and more of me to also go into research and academia. And then and why this is important, I think, is and now it's been almost 10 years that I'm really in between in a way. I don't see any distinctions and borders. I think it's also a constant task to actually undo all these classifications. We speak, of course, a lot about interdisciplinarity, post-transdisciplinarity, indisciplinarity these days, but I think it's anyways always a work how to find a way to situate oneself. But I think that actually being in now research environments as an artist, I think there is a like a bit like today, I think there is a power that is, I think, lies in this specific, I call them, of bringing in other really other voices and bodies, just so, because I think just in academia in general, I mean, of course, now there are so many different sciences, but I think we all, like many of us, struggle in natural and social science and humanities, especially we who are dealing with, you know, the world out there, which is actually all research in some ways. I think there is many people have struggled how to, you know, how do you actually, of course, reduce or, you know, put into 2 dimensions on paper and text or just photo. How do you convey this complexity and everything is going on? And I think in this way art is powerful because yes, you know, I don't learning from, you know, feminism and of course land-based knowers. I mean, I try, just very simple fact is that I avoid or try to unlearn and withdraw from speaking of others that are not present. And so this is art actually that, you know, now I cannot be at the same time. Now in the back you see this is like a place in what's now called Serbia, a prehistoric copper mine. I cannot be in Talvivaara at the same time and there, but I can summon them, bring them somehow, somewhat through photography, video, and sound. So I think that's one of the main, for me, goals. I think also when it becomes research, to not let these things drop off the page. And so in writing, yes, it's always a challenge. As I said, I think so many colleagues, you know, whoever is working with with the relations out there in the world has this I think, struggle. So I think it's more about, I'm trying to kind of, yeah, a bit break down the traditional writing into more poetic. And this text, for example, is written in verse, actually. First, it was written actually as an article, I think, proper article. I don't know. First, it was verse, then it became academic article, which never got published. Then it became verse back again, and then it will be published in Muster in the Muster Index magazine, which is this again arts and research space. So yeah, but how do they nurture? It's a bit the same as well, because reading and writing, as let's call it academic practice, as well for me, is, you know, it's talking to other persons, the same as being out in the woods or with other bodies. It's talking and listening. So yeah, in that sense, I feel a very total continuity, and in that sense, they nurture each other.
Thank you so much. That's such an interesting insight into bringing these two practices together. I feel like that's, oh, sorry, here I am. Hi. I feel like these are two spaces, as you were saying, you know, there's a lot of talk about interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, but I think that this was a really beautiful illustration of really creating a meaningful connection between the art and the science. But you guys don't want to listen to me. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to contribute to the conversation? I really welcome you to come on in. Not everybody at once. Okay. Well, then you get to hear me a little bit more, but please feel free, like I said, to either use the chat or come on in for either a question or a comment. It would also be great to hear any reflections on what the piece raised for you. I know for me, it was, there were some of those really startling juxtapositions between the factory spaces and the natural spaces. How did you decide which images you were going to include in this piece?
Yeah. Yeah, well, again, yes, I think it comes from history, from, you know, experience, and like, yeah, in a way, from the conversations and sounds and emotions and, you know, sensations that got impressed into me. But for example, and this came about also really now, because, you know, the images come from, yeah, stretch back, I don't know, 5-6 years of images that you've seen, and sounds also. So it's, you know, it's just of course, it's a living experience. And for example, the factory, I think I would like to, yes, this is something actually really came about now when preparing piece for you today, because it comes from another, let's say, story, quite a different one, or a work, an artwork that was made in Serbia, ex-Yugoslavia 4 or 5 years ago. But that particular space, which was the third section, is actually e-waste recycling factory. So these people, I felt quite strongly with, I was honored and privileged to actually gain access there, and they allowed me to film, and they helped in this artwork that we were making then. But to me, that this particular somehow work really stayed with me very strongly, because well, maybe my whole, you know, process of undoing my own extractivism and also then becoming active around it, it came more or less from, you know, simply holding you know, one of these devices in the hand and just opening it up, and just, you know, then you get into, you are plunged into the hidden abode of production, let's say. So it comes from this, of course, having been an urban dweller, from this imposed dependency on technology, and specifically, of course, informational technology. So to actually see the other side of it, and to see the recycling part of it, that was, and I think is so striking, because there are many things that I learned there, but one of them was just to see actually the amount of work and how manual it is. That, you know, we are all, that there is all this talk, you know, about AI and everything, but this is, you know, people, there are some machines, of course, but lots of stuff just needs to be dismantled by hand, and also a lot of it cannot be dismantled because, of course, it's designed in such, you know, for, you know, planned obsolescent ways. So it's designed not to be dismantled. So it kind of really, I think that stuck with me those 2 days there, really stayed with me. That actually really is one of the moments, together with seeing Minds and X-Minds, as one of the moments where somehow the real insanity of the whole apparatus of IT really just shows so clearly in some ways. Because, you know, what is it that we make that we cannot unmake? It's just so much waste. And then again, these people toiling and laboring and in these dusts, you know, and really, you know, noisy, of course, but still, I just felt that actually they are also somehow, you know, this is not production, you know, what is it then? So I actually thought, you know, really felt, especially these last few weeks when I was going through this again somehow and looking in hindsight, because I haven't somehow looked it back, or I have this summer actually as part, on other work. So this came back to me, these sounds and images. So I felt, okay, but this might be, again, even though it's classified as industrial labor, we think about this, you know, modernity, whatever, but there are some glimpses there and some moments and conversations and that I felt, okay, but this might actually be the work of, again, social reproduction. You know, is this social reproduction of Earth? You know, because of course, if we don't want to mine, and we must definitely decrease maximally, well, and there is still a need for technology. Of course, a lot of it needs to be recycled, but only about 10% of, as we heard also previously with these 3 days, is recycled of e-waste. So yes, I just felt that this is really challenging the boundaries also, and these classifications. You know, what is manufacturing, what is production, what is reproduction. So I felt that I want to bring them in, to call them in, so to say.
That's really interesting. And, you know, it's such a salient point. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is how we come to accept these processes. Like, yes, of course, we have to manufacture the technology. We have to do this. But I've been recently thinking about, even though, yes, it's been happening my whole lifetime, so, well, more or less, I'm not going to date myself completely, but, you know, it feels like, oh, it's just been that way forever. But in truth, we're dealing with such a short moment of time on the actual human continuum, and such a short moment that has such lasting, it's going to have such lasting implications. And yeah, I think that the point that you made about these things being manufactured to be obsolete and also to be undismantlable is just chilling in a way.
Yeah, the time, I think, is really, as you say, it's really, mind-boggling, and just also, again, just to sense it is just, so troubling, but again, also empowering. I think that's, part of this work. I hope to actually really also, again, with all these voices, you know, specifically from, you know, Black diaspora, and of course from many First Nations, and that actually there is this actual understanding, and that, you know, this is really a blimp in this, on also for us, but also for this Earth, but also for us as people, that actually, you know, it's been 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, to 500, you know, it is. But even 500, which is, you know, the coloniality, again, we can go beyond, and we will. That's it. I mean, and so many places have. There is before and beyond and under, you know, and it's in parallel, of course, running all the time. But it is, of course, terribly violent, and of course, it can drag most of beings, and is dragging most of beings down, you know, into the hole. But again, I think I really think, and that again, through poetry, this is a bit easier than through writing. I like to have this point to actually really put it in a place and say, okay, look, this all powerful, apparatus is, and is actually, very short-sighted and very narrow-blinded. It's actually, really cannot see, the 99% of what's going on this. Yeah, right. And of course, while not seeing it, also is able to and not wanting to see, is able to trample on these bodies. But again, it also actually cannot see. I think that's also something important. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer. Shifting gears just a little bit, we have another question from the chat. Maria is wanting to know, she wants to know more about the changing background sound and how you yourself make sense of the blend of the images, sounds, and the spoken word.
Yeah, well, it's well, again, it's a gathering somehow, always, calling out as a friend. So in a way, it's bringing together disparate geography, sometimes disparate bodies, sometimes proximate bodies, neighboring bodies, but sometimes also quite apart. And in that sense, I think it's the work of gathering always. So gathering, bodies in a circle or in this stream, and there are just different modes of doing it. Sometimes image or film is maybe, I think it's appropriate to the let's say mode of being of this situation or of these bodies, and sometimes I think sound is. But again, of course, because it's always a calling somehow. I think, of course, there are tensions and contradictions, of course, and I can't see and feel them sometimes, but sometimes I can. And yeah, so of course, it's a process. It's always an attempt to put the difference together. And again, the main challenge, which is a bit of what we spoke about just now, in a way. So here also, I think then the challenge is, of course, the crucial challenge in all this is, how to dismantle representation, both aesthetic, artistic, and ontological and epistemic, but actual representation. So that works only through relations. So yeah, again, trying to be accountable, responsible, and to specifically also the bodies maybe imaged and the sounds recorded. And another challenge, I think, which is a bit similar again, is how to find a place for the in all this, how to find a place or non-place for the, like, say, hegemonic representation or the narratives. So what is the actual time and space to really afford to extractivist apparatus and capitalism, like, if, and that's again, that relates to many problems. So I will not go maybe too deep into it, but the problem of critique, for example, how to actually really have a gaze that is relentlessly, of course, facing the apparatus, while at the same time actually really not getting dragged into that power game, because I think that's also again a problem for knowers, but especially for activism and organizing, of course, how not to get exhausted by retelling this and even just retelling the story of a mine or of this sort. It's drains energy, I think, and I know from people, yeah, I've listened to. So that's again the issue, how to actually create an autonomous space within it. Yeah. So where to place these extra co-patriarchal colonial mechanisms and their sounds and their images, and often, of course, this implies also, in a way, just kind of not bringing them in. So this, in this case, there is a movement. So there is like, yeah, I thought also it's an ongoing issue, but again, how much one wants to allow them to kind of come in, because they anyways have so much power and space, you know, everywhere around. And yet again, how not to kind of just turn the back, and because then also we don't know actually what's going on, like to just switch off is also not actually possible. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that insight. We have a comment coming out of the text, which maybe you can further reflect on. Sana is saying, building off what you just said, that she thinks in trying to examine and understand extractivism, there is so much unseen or visible in plain sight, which makes a lot of the research about uncovering patterns and aspects of the practices and mindsets. And in this task, she says that art is such a powerful tool. And she's thanking you again for the performance. So do you have any reflection further maybe on this pattern uncovering?
Yeah, I guess it can be called, and we've seen some really amazing practices also over the last 2 days of the conference. Colleagues who do this super important work. So yes, clearly, I mean, one of the techniques of why this is even possible is quite simply because there's been a lot of effort and planning and designing to actually make all this invisible, starting from the, you know, how of black boxing, you know, the IT devices, of course, not starting, but I think it's also very important present that there's just these black boxes or shiny boxes lying around, and, you know, manufactured, assembled, and so on in very dubious modes, and yet they are here and they're kind of often just next to us. But again, also with mining, which has been one, and is one of my main preoccupations. Again, mining has been, I think, my sense of it is that it's been possible to actually come to this stage where it is the most destructive industry on the planet, contributing more than 50% of emissions just on the extraction part, and not even the burning of emissions, greenhouse emissions, and, you know, contributing to up to 90% of biodiversity loss, according to the UN Global Out UN's report from last year, Global Resources Outlook. So why it's been possible to come to this moment is because actually it is often peripheralized or hidden out of sight. It's just such an obvious fact, but I think it's just so incredibly powerful that at the same time, of course, where most of the, actually now it is most of the humanity, but it's taken such a long time to put most of the humanity to cities, and we got there only a few years back, which again is also striking, looking at the mainstream narratives of urbanity and cities and so on. It's been just a few years that we can say that more people live in the cities than the countryside, let's say, but especially in the overdeveloped parts of the world, in the north, this process has been much more accelerated. So the fact is, like, it's just simple that why removing people from the land, from the valleys, from the hills, from the mountains, then actually one can clear cut much easier, one can build a dam much easier, one can open a mine much easier. And of course, now this is obviously not true, because there is always people. There is never this, oh, there is no people, like that infamous words very recently said, and many times said in the history by this mining company working in Sapmi, Jokkmokk. But yeah, of course there is always people, but it's the wager is that there is fewer people, or as few as possible. And again, of course, there is always also many other bodies. But again, for the majority, and specifically now speaking about also bring this back into our other conversations also on these 3 days, it is again very important and problematic fact that there is such incredible power disbalance, at least in the overdeveloped parts of the world, between cities. Just to think, about knowledge production and so on, where universities are and so on, where arts are, so to say, culture, mostly. It's so still quite heavily centralized, and it's still being now, of course, there are projects of decentralizing and so on, but the point is that yes, this peripheralization of extraction is so fundamental. But again, often it is just, not just, but and many people do, but it is about actually going and meeting these places and people and actually learning and listening, because again, the most extraordinary and outrageous, of course, holes and disasters are effectively in the, let's call it, global south or the third world, on the underdeveloped part of the world. And it's again a privilege to, in some extent, to be able to go there, coming from these latitudes, let's say. But again, it's the whole Europe, of course, is the product of this. So it's actually, in a way, one doesn't actually even need to get out of the city anymore, as we also learned last 2 days, which is also been very important now, to actually really see the extent in which this is spilling. It's never left. It comes from cities in a way as a logic. It goes over into the land, but also spills back now in so many practices, including data mining we listened yesterday to. So it's a constant work.
Yeah, that's a very interesting reflection. And I think that there is, finding that balance between like everything as extractivism and then what actually is extractivism. And I personally fall more on the side, as Alexander Dunlap was saying in our plenary roundtable, I fall more on the side of everything as extractivism. Like, I feel like the more you look at it, the more there is to look at, or like the more I've learned about it, the more there is to see. But yeah, I think that's a really salient point, is that it has been peripheralized over the extent of extractivism. I mean, perhaps in the past it was more on physical peripheries, and now we're getting also to where it's the peripheries of what we can actually understand. Because I know, especially with, like, for example, this new territory of data extractivism, it's all there for all of us to see. It's not necessarily physically removed, but it's mentally removed, because I know that I personally can't necessarily understand some of the it's the thing of the there's the known knowns, and then the known unknowns, and the unknown knowns, and then with some of this extractivist stuff, it's the unknown unknowns. Like, how can we even know what we don't know to know? And I think that goes sometimes too with, like, bringing this invisible into plain sight. Like, how can we see the things we don't know to see? So I know that this past couple of years, for me at least, in getting more literate about extractivism and how it plays out in our world, I'm constantly things that, maybe 5 years ago I wouldn't have looked at and necessarily thought of as extractivists. Now I look at them and I'm like, oh my gosh, that came from, or like the components that make up the things that they make up. And of course, the cognitive dissonance of this all is we're right now literally communing over devices that are made of these rare earth minerals. So I don't know if that led into anything you can respond to, but just some exposition.
No, I mean, definitely that's a really important one conversation. I mean, of course, starting from the first day and stretching, I think that's part of the work of this symposium. And clearly there are really important stakes now, not even getting into some sort of course, academic property around it, but in terms of actual change, and campaigning and activism. Of course, there are really important stakes to add in by using the word and its genealogy and so on. So yeah, of course, not everything can be, but I think what's been also very powerful in some of the theorizations that go maybe a bit beyond the original ones, like maybe the initial conception of the term that Eduardo Godinez really maybe presented 2 days back. It's brought so many other also people, researchers, activists into the conversation. So, and this means, of course, that it opens, it has to be resituated, of course, and it is different in Southeast Europe, in this part of Europe, and in Latin America, in Turtle Island. So, but that's the work, of course. While again, that's one thing, and the other one, I think also, what for me was, as you were saying, I think a bit, it really opens the eyes to the noticing stuff and actually trying to also look at how, I mean, it's part of this, again, a little bit larger consideration that's been happening and also, in my Marxist studies, but also like Glenn Coulthard also writes amazingly about it in his book, that actually primitive accumulation, for me, I mean, extractivism, if we can somehow relate it in a more simple level, is very close to primitive accumulation in a way, and it's just never gone away. It's not historical, it's not past, it's just possibly, and I'm more on that side, part of every capitalist transaction. Extraction as mode of appropriation specifically. That actually there might be no capitalist transaction where there is not an extractivist component. But again, it does not mean that all of them are predominantly extractivist. I think that's, for me, at least, an important difference. And again, through this work, I've been trying also to relate it to, as you've heard, to relate it also to come from the mainly gender perspective, and also to relate, of course, and it's of course a large conversation as well, to keep close also the race, the race struggle around it. So, which is again part of something that I'd like to quote here. I think that this is also something that I think is really interesting, and it also relates to the discussion from the first day with Anna Willow as well, Alexander Dunlap. That in a way, I believe strongly that there cannot be extractivism without racism and sexism. So, but I don't have any stakes in now creating a causality around it. First comes this, and then comes that. It's just for me like such a strong correlation. And then as Australian, Canadian, sorry, now based in Australia, feminist Australian Imanis told at a symposium last year, and that really opened my eyes also around these issues, is she told, I hope I'm not misquoting, that global warming or climate breakdown is a symptom of racism and sexism. So yeah, so I'm part of that kind of work to actually really somehow, yeah, so really trying to cannot give it a label, but really to see that, because often somehow technology is such a powerful discourse in a way, and it's important, and there is a lot of important, of course, in relevant science and technology studies, and I keep that always close. But I think that these are technologies that are, yeah, really the molten core somehow, yeah, and the related, of course, related intersections, which of course get to do with the ability, disability, and the class, and yeah, and of course ethnicity, and which again close to racism. But yeah, these specific technologies, there's a lot of work, of course, there. So I'm just also very interested how to bring all but these worlds a bit closer together. Yeah, on the one side, that's the more critical side, while more empowering side is really, again, if we are talking, you know, we are talking from feminist queer standpoint, while holding this up front, what do we learn more also from extractivist conversations, anti-extractivist, post-extractivist conversation? What can we do? Yeah, what can we do more? How do we ally more and better?
Thank you so much for that. We have a comment from the chat, and Alessandra wanted to say thank you so much for the wonderful performance. And she said that it brought to mind also a piece, First and Last Men, by Icelandic film composer Jóhann Jóhannsson. I have not heard of this piece before. I look forward to checking it out.
Okay, I will as well. Thanks, Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra. That's great. And then as crazy as it is, time just flies, doesn't it? So we're at the end of our time together this morning. Mirko, before I do the announcements, is there anything else you would like to say before our time together closes?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I guess thank you, Gitu, Tak, Hvala. That's all. Thanks for being with us today. Yeah.
Thank you
and I
so
hope we
much.
meet next year a bit more proximate, so we can
Yes.
talk more. Yeah.
I look forward to a world where we can hopefully all be proximate in responsible ways. Again, I think that would be very nice. So yeah, thank you so much for spending this time with us and taking us on this journey this morning, and then sharing with us your really interesting thoughts and responding to some of our questions.